Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Simon Marks and these are the headlines of this Tuesday. Vladimir Putin says Russia wants to save people in 4 Moscow-controlled territories in Ukraine on the final day of annexation votes that have been denounced as a sham by Western leaders. A new pipeline that will carry Norwegian gas via Denmark is inaugurated in Poland. It's an effort to strengthen energy security in Eastern Europe after Russia terminated supplies to the Poles. South Africa's ex-president Jacob Zuma, facing corruption charges that have already led to his imprisonment, says he is ready to make a political comeback. Hurricane Ian makes landfall in western Cuba. The storm is now set to strengthen and head towards the west coast of Florida. And the dollar weakens slightly against major currencies, helping the pound to rebound from a record low, while equity markets stabilise after days of volatility. It's the final day of voting in Russian-hosted referenda in several parts of Ukraine, 4 Russian-held regions where the Kremlin insists people are independently deciding their future, but many international governments say the Russians are engaged in a sham. The referenda asks people whether they want their regions to become part of the Russian Federation or not. Polling stations have been set up in Donetsk, Luhansk and parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson, a total of around 15% of Ukrainian territory that the Kremlin is now believed to be trying to seize. The past 4 days saw 2 types of voting, one where armed soldiers could be seen going door to door amid reports of voter intimidation, and the other full-fledged voting booths that have been set up. Reports suggest there is one ballot for each entire household, so not everyone is entitled to an individual vote. The British government said today that Vladimir Putin is preparing to welcome the predetermined outcome of the referenda by formally annexing the disputed regions within the next few days. He would seek to redraw Ukraine's borders, change the nationality of 4 million people, and engage in what the Kremlin is calling the reunification of Russia. Ukraine and its allies in the West have called the voting a sham and pledged not to recognise any of the results. President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that annexation will destroy any chance of peace talks. The United States is prepared to impose additional economic costs on Russia, although there are questions about just how much economic punishment can still be inflicted against Moscow, given the size of sanctions packages that have already been unveiled. The scenes playing out in Ukraine are ripped from Russia's 2014 playbook in Crimea. Moscow held a referendum there, and for the last 8 years, the Kremlin has maintained that Crimea is part of Russia, an assertion rejected by Western governments. For more on all of this, I'm joined today by Yehor Brailyan, a journalist covering international security and defence issues in Ukraine. He joins us live from Kiev. Mr. Brailyan, while the Ukrainian government is absolutely rejecting these referenda, and along with Western governments saying that the outcome of them will not be respected or honoured, the reality is that the Russians have managed to go ahead and hold these elections. Is there not a concern that they are simply trying to create new facts on the ground to which at some point the rest of the international community is going to have to catch up?
First of all, we have to understand that the Russian Federation is needed this so-called referendum, because we can't call it in such a way, because it's performance, it's circus, it's a manipulation of the global public opinion, but it's not a referendum. And Russia is needed either to make the annexation of the territories of the south of Ukraine more legal for the international audience. And that's why it's very important for the whole world to reject all of these actions which Russia is doing in the south of Ukraine, because it's illegal and it's the violation of all international laws. And that world which was formed after the Second World War, and these borders and all this international stuff, it was destroyed by Vladimir Putin. And it's very important to understand that Vladimir Putin is using all possible instruments to spread its own propaganda that so-called the people of Donbass or something like that. It's all wrong, and the world must step up in punishing Russia for it, because the world didn't punish Russia for this so-called referendum or what it was, the annexation of Crimea 8 years ago. And for example, such countries as the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, they have finally recognized only 2 years ago that the Western approach towards Russian aggression against Ukraine 8 years ago was weak. And I hope that the West...
So, Mr. Bralian, let me ask you about that situation, particularly as it pertains to Crimea, because, as you say, the referendum that essentially led to the annexation of Crimea remains still an unsolved issue and may well have inspired Vladimir Putin to hold these referenda today in Ukraine. What should the West do differently this time around that it didn't do with regard to Crimea?
First of all, is to kick out the Russia from the UN Security Council, to kick out Russia from all possible international organizations. There is no place for Russia in the civilized world. And Russia must become a truly pariah. Truly pariah, a country in which foreign companies won't make business, a country in which it would be impossible to do all other economic stuff. Russian leadership and Russian population, they must understand that they are terrorists, and they are committing war crimes, and that's all. And the West must step up, first of all, in sanctioning Russia, in energy, not only in energy, but first of all in technology, because the armed forces of Ukraine have found American technologies in drones from Iran, which were supplied to Russia from Tehran. And it's very important that the sanctions have to be like complex. It's not would be like, okay, we will sanction it, but won't sanction that. Sanctions, military aid of Ukraine, and starting the process of tribunal against Vladimir Putin and his inner circle. And the world must understand that there are no good Russians. All Russians are, at this or that point, are imperialists. And they want to do only one thing. They want to conquer other territories. They want to gain the influence all over the world. Remember, the Sahel region, former French colonies in the West Africa. Remember Latin America, and remember different parts of the world. Russia is a global problem.
Yehor Brailian, a journalist specialising in defence and security cooperation issues, joining us there live from Kiev and really underscoring the very high stakes that lie ahead in the days and weeks to come. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, Russia's partial military mobilisation has left the country polarised. While some are calling for a full-scale national call-up, the reservists already forced to head to the front line are telling a very different story.
These are scenes from Russia's first wartime mobilization since World War II. Reservists in the Far East territory of Kamchatka called to fight are handed rifles in a ceremony. The mobilization comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin last week ordered the call-up of some 300,000 reservists to bolster his army's flagging operations in Ukraine. Those called up boarded buses. Some loved ones wept. This reservist, who gave his name as Nikita, said the draft notice came to his home. He told Reuters he'd be happy if he comes back. At the rifle ceremony, a commander told the reservists the whole country was putting their hopes in these men. 9 time zones west, in Russia's Rostov region, a different kind of ceremony, a wedding before the groom departs for a military base. Members of the recruitment commission checked ID cards and reservists undergo a medical examination. Some are young, others old. Those who spoke to Reuters appeared resigned to fight. Reservist Roman Khodakov said his mother was unhappy about it, but said he had to defend his country. Not all Russians were willing to board the buses to bases. This man crossed from Russia to Finland, telling Reuters, quote, "I don't want to fight for Putin." Russians have fled to neighboring Georgia, Kazakhstan, and booked flights to Turkey and Serbia to avoid the draft. Flights out of Russia have sold out and cars have piled up at border checkpoints. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Monday told reporters Moscow hadn't taken any decision yet on whether to seal the borders and stop the exodus.
In other news today, Indian External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is set to meet US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The top Indian diplomat is here in Washington, D.C. He was received by US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who welcomed his guest with an honor guard at the Pentagon before the US and Indian delegations sat down for talks.
I do share with you that the global situation has become far more challenging this year for a variety of reasons. And the Indo-Pacific in particular, it's important that the stability, security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific should be secured, and that is best done, amongst others, by cooperation between two countries.
Today we are positioning the U.S. and Indian militaries to operate and coordinate more closely together than ever. And we're taking significant steps, to deepen our defense cooperation, from stronger information sharing and defense industrial ties to cooperation in emerging defense domains, including through the launch of a new dialogue later this year. All this will help ensure that our militaries are ready for future challenges.
The meeting comes 2 days after Jaishankar delivered a speech at the United Nations General Assembly maintaining India's neutral stance over the war in Ukraine. He also took a sharp dig at ties between the United States and Pakistan. Jaishankar's remarks came after the US decided to send its F-16 Jet Fleet Sustainment program to Pakistan. According to the Biden administration, India and Pakistan are both partners of the US with different points of emphasis. Meanwhile, Pakistan reacted to the Indian Foreign Minister's statement, saying it sought to respect basic norms of interstate relations and refrain from commenting on the bilateral ties between the US and Pakistan. For more on all of this, I am joined by Susan Tehrani, WION's correspondent live from New York. And Susan, give us a sense, if you will, of precisely what we can expect out of the meeting between S. Jaishankar and Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Well, Simon, as you noted, there is some concern on the part of India regarding this F-16 issue, although the United States has tried to make clear that it's for somewhat counterterrorism measures and security measures to deal with issues, regional issues and cross-border issues, possibly regarding Afghanistan. And has downplayed this F-16 deal. There's not only concern from India, but there is a lot of concern from lawmakers here in the United States as well as to why this administration went ahead, even if it's sort of, a small deal, a somewhat symbolic deal, and went ahead after the Trump administration sort of backed off in making these kind of defense deals with Pakistan, and made this deal because, as you know, there are still remnants and concerns that Pakistan was a major harbor of the masterminds of the 9/11 attacks here, and it hasn't done anything to sort of restore its image of not being that sort of haven. So that's one aspect of it, and Dr. Jaishankar is probably going to raise that concern with the United States, and the United States will again say that it is not directed in any way towards India. It's not directed towards sending a message to India. Some analysts here said perhaps that was the case because India, had this neutral stance when it came to the Russia-Ukraine war, and was still working with Russia on the sidelines when it came to defense as well. The United States, for what it's worth, has debunked those claims. On the other hand, it's in a very tough situation because of its over-the-horizon policies when it comes to Afghanistan, and it's facing a lot of criticism regarding that as well. So one can't help to wonder whether or not that might be an aspect of those, F-16 deals as well. So, these are all the issues that may come up, and Anthony Blinken may ultimately, at press conferences scheduled afterwards, try to explain these in hindsight. But I think the issue of Russia and Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, will definitely come up as well. The United States has been trying to gain more allies on its side, and India has been clear in its stance. So we'll have to see where that dialogue leads to. And then ultimately, of course, there's the issue of the safety and security of the Indo-Pacific. India and the United States are very strong partners, not only in the framework of the Quad, but bilaterally as well. They share the same interests for an open and secure Indo-Pacific. And also, I think it's important to note that when it comes to defense and when it comes to relations, defense relations between India and the United States are the strongest. So that aspect of it, despite the fact that they've been discussed already with the Pentagon, they're definitely going to come up possibly between Anthony Blinken and his Indian counterpart, S. Jaishankar, as well. Lots to talk about between the two.
Lots on the table. Neatly summarised there for us live from New York City by WION's US correspondent Susan Tehrani. For more on all of this, WION's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibal has sent us this report.
The Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and the US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken are going to meet very soon in Washington today. And of course, the key focus will be on convergences. Remember, both countries are part of Quad grouping. They're part of the I2U2 and working together in the Indo-Pacific, even as China has been aggressive. On the table, of course, will be issues like an aggressive China, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And while we have seen ahead of the meeting a lot of focus on the comments made by the Indian External Affairs Minister on F-16 pact when it comes to America and Pakistan, but largely these comments are to send a message to Washington from Washington itself. But by and large, these are minor irritants, because remember, when India sits with its American counterpart, the Foreign Minister ministers of both countries sit together today. They sit as equals. They sit as two countries supporting each other in every way possible, with people-to-people relationship becoming a strong pillar of this relationship. When the Pakistani foreign minister sits with the American counterpart, he's sitting as someone who needs support amidst the devastating floods, and perhaps that is the relationship Islamabad and Washington share, a relationship which of course Washington has been very clear about, and we have seen concerted effort by US to tell to the world and to New Delhi that they have dehyphenated the relationship between Islamabad and New Delhi. With video journalist Chandrasekhar, Siddhant Sibul for WION in New Delhi.
The Kremlin has granted Russian citizenship to US whistleblower Edward Snowden. He's enjoyed refuge in the country since 2013 after he leaked documents relating to the US National Security Agency's top secret operations, including the telephone surveillance of millions of American citizens.
Former U.S. intelligence contractor and whistleblower Edward Snowden on Monday was granted Russian citizenship by that country's president, Vladimir Putin. This comes 9 years after Snowden first exposed the scale of secret surveillance operations by the U.S. National Security Agency. The now 39-year-old fled the United States and was given asylum in Russia after leaking secret files in 2013 that revealed vast domestic and international surveillance operations carried out by the NSA, where he worked. At the time, he spoke to The Guardian's Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras.
When you see everything, you see them on a more frequent basis, and you recognize that some of these things are actually abuses. And when you talk to people about them, in a place like this, where this is the normal state of business, people tend not to take them very seriously.
U.S. authorities have for years wanted him returned to the United States to face a criminal trial on espionage charges. Putin, himself a former Russian spy chief, said in 2017 that Snowden was wrong to leak U.S. secrets, but was not a traitor. Russia granted Snowden permanent residency rights in 2020, paving the way for him to obtain Russian citizenship.
Japan honoured its longest-serving Prime Minister Shinzo Abe with a rare state funeral today. Abe's ashes were placed in the centre of proceedings for guests to pay their respects. That was followed by a guard of honour with 19 rounds of cannon fire. Around 20,000 policemen were deployed around the venue just weeks after Abe's assassination. Some 700 foreign guests were in attendance, among them 50 current or former government figures. Notable attendees included Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US Vice President Kamala Harris, and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. The state funeral came on the heels of a week-long protest, with many Japanese expressing anger over the state funeral at a time when the country's currency is depreciating. The estimated cost of the funeral was over $11 million, all of it taxpayer funded. State funerals are rare in Japan. Only members of the royal family are usually afforded that privilege.
The problem is that they used our tax money for this. It would not have been a problem if the cost was covered by the LDP or the cabinet. That's what I feel.
Initially, I hated the assassin, but now thinking about it, I greatly understand his feelings too. But still, it's not okay to kill. In order to visit here, I closed my own business temporarily on the 26th and the 27th and came here.
The gloves are finally off. The king of wild chess launches an all-out attack against Hans Neiman. Magnus Carlson questions the American Grandmaster's integrity in a lengthy statement. Going forward, Carlson refuses to play against Neiman or other cheaters.
What?
No. The King's Gambit. Through the day on WION.
So the gloves are indeed finally off in the cheating scandal that has rocked the world of chess. World champion Magnus Carlson has now broken his silence and explicitly accused American Grandmaster Hans Neiman of cheating. Carlson is the undisputed king of world chess, rarely losing an over-the-board game. That's why his loss to the 19-year-old Neiman created headlines, with the Norwegian then sending rumour mills into overdrive by pulling out of a major tournament earlier this month. Amid a frenzy of speculation about a possible cheating scandal, Neiman conceded that he had cheated in the past during online games, but claimed those days were firmly behind him. Carlson and Neiman were drawn to face each other last week during an online competition, and the Norwegian stunned the chess fraternity by resigning after just one move. The sport's world governing body, FIDE, reprimanded him for tanking the game and setting a wrong example. And now Carlson has responded with an all-out attack, calling cheating an existential threat to the game. He wrote, "I believe that Neiman has cheated more, and more recently, than he has publicly admitted. His over-the-board progress has been unusual, and throughout our game in the Sinquefield Cup, I had the impression that he wasn't tense or even fully concentrating on the game. We must do something," he concluded, "about cheating, and for my part, going forward, I don't want to play against people that have cheated repeatedly in the past." Now, Carlson hasn't provided any proof of Neiman's cheating yet, but did say that he will have more to say on the matter. The teenager has denied any wrongdoing at the Sinquefield Cup and claimed that the Norwegian was simply embarrassed to lose to him. From an Aston Martin stunt car to costumes worn by Daniel Craig, an array of James Bond props and memorabilia is being offered up at a charity auction as the film franchise celebrates 60 years. Let's remain shaken but not stirred as we take a look. Never forget, when you're asked which Bond film is the best, the correct answer is always Goldfinger. That's WION Live Broadcast from Washington, DC. We'll give the world another spin at the same time tomorrow. Until then, stay with us for all your news updates right here on WION. World is One.
There are many other...